So on some of my other platforms, I was talking about compatibility. So I thought I would continue it here and just go a little bit deeper into it. Now, obviously, I can see a lot about compatibility between people. This doesn't just have to be romantic. This can be between parents and children, work colleagues, friendships, any kind of interaction with another person. If I can put, in terms of astrology, if I can put two charts together, in terms of numerology, if I can look at the different numbers and how they all correlate, and in human design, if I can look at the two different body graphs. Numerology is the sort of, I wouldn't say it's like superficial or anything, but it's the most direct, the least detailed. Then astrology, then human design. So again, it depends on how far you want to go with that. But obviously, again, it will depend very much on what people want. So if they want to understand how both people communicate, right? Like to understand what the complications and the differences are and what the compatible points are, like how they see eye to eye. I would look at areas relating to that, and there's quite a few. So I would go pretty deep on that. How both people like to give and receive love. This is another really important one. I mean, you can call it love languages, but I think even just understanding how the signs that relate to these areas, how those interact together will show a lot about how compatible or incompatible people are. I think when it comes to the longevity of a relationship, you have to look at what Saturn and Pluto are doing in both charts. Do the signs that are connecting to both people when it comes to these two placements, do they work together or do they not? The houses that these two planets are in, do they also correlate with the other person? As in, are they complementary houses? All of these things are going to be important. And again, when it comes to longevity, so how long the two of you stick together, you have to look at some of those things. I think Jupiter is another one that will really help, because Jupiter is about expansion. And anytime you make something bigger in terms of longevity, does that bigger product, does it mesh or does it kind of create friction? Again, this is all best case scenario. When we're putting things together, we also, again, it depends on where we're at with the couple. So if we're talking about maybe one person who's been through a lot, it could be some kind of abuse, again, different forms. How well has this person faced all of those lessons? How much of what they understand happened is because it was lessons based, or how much is it that they've chosen to blame other people? And look, I wish we didn't have to go through these things, but sometimes that's just what happens in life. And it depends on what you do with it. Everybody has to deal with some kind of trauma. Nobody is without. So it's obvious it's a big part of what we do to grow and to learn. So do we learn from it, or do we torture ourselves and torture others through it? Again, these are important questions. If a person has only learned to torture other people, and you decide to date this person, or you're in their life in some capacity or whatever, it means you're going to be the brunt of the torture at some point. So again, if they're not willing to face it and work on it, then it's something you're going to have to face. But you can't fix it because it's to do with somebody else. But you will definitely have to pay the price. So again, it's this understanding. Do you want to deal with that with the person or not? Again, how much of your self-worth is tied into your own experiences? Do you think you don't deserve better than that, so you stick around? Do you think, I can help this person, I can change them? We all can fall into that category. Any of these categories, really. And, the intentions might be good, and I don't dispute that. But if you're dealing with a person who will not work on it and will not face it and will not, then it's pointless. You won't have a relationship. You'll be a caretaker or a psychologist with a patient who doesn't want to do the work. but you're not getting paid. I mean, and this is worth looking into. Again, it could even be the other way around with the other person, whatever. Or it could be both people. In which case, how do these people choose to repress these things they've been through? Do they use drugs and alcohol and other self-destructive, addictive tendencies? Because if that's the case, neither person is being their true selves, and they're hiding behind substances. So again, you're going to have some pretty cataclysmic, catastrophic arguments. The whole relationship is going to be very tumultuous and difficult. You both will be competing and fighting. Now, I'm not saying that this is always the case, but when you start bringing substances into things, yeah, it usually makes things worse. I can't think of an instance where it makes it better, to be honest, because you're not really being yourself. And at the end of the day, that then deters you from the path you should be headed down. Same with the other person. So you might not even really be compatible with this person. You just linked because you both do the same substance, or you're both not facing things. So you both choose to not face them together, and then also, again, against each other. Again, I'm bringing in a lot of different possible scenarios, but these things are more common than people think when it comes to relationships. Pretty much everybody has been through this, or is still going through it. And again, I talk a lot about health on this channel in particular. I talk a lot about addiction. I talk about a lot of the things that really do affect an individual person, and then by extension, any relationships they choose to have. Because if you're not facing your dark corners, your shadow, your whatever, your life, your shadow, your relationships, every single part of you and anybody who deals with you, it's going to be more difficult than it needs to be. So this is worth seeing that, recognizing it, and then working with it, working on it. Again, there are differences, especially when it comes to communication. This can be really challenging. If both people don't have compatible communication points, it's very difficult for you to understand their perspective, and of course for them to understand yours, and that creates friction. Sometimes this can be an exciting friction, other times it's just arguments, right? And the funny thing with arguments, in most cases people argue, it's either to compete, to win, or it's simply the frustration of being misunderstood. So this is worth paying attention to in terms of compatibility. Also, what are your political stances? What are your spiritual or religious beliefs? Because these things are huge. Now, political, maybe not as much. I mean, you might create some tension here. Again, it depends on what kind of relationship you're in. Depends on what things are important to you. Libra, Pallas, Sagittarius, these signs are going to be probably a little bit tied into politics, because both of these signs care a great, and Pallas is kind of similar to Libra in a way, but they're going to deal very much with the political, legal standpoint. And Sagittarius also cares about that, but again, on top of that, it's very connected to spirituality and religion. So, these things are really important to discuss, because if, for instance, one person is highly religious and the other person is not, there's going to be friction here. Again, it depends on how far we push this. If we're dealing with a person who's extremely religious, they were raised that way, they were indoctrinated, they believe this to the bottom of their core, and the other person is strongly opposed, maybe they were raised that way and then decided not to continue that pathway, or they were never, that's pretty unlikely, because a big chunk of history is religious indoctrination, but perhaps they weren't raised that way, in which case you're not going to see things eye to eye from a perspective of, normally again, it depends on the religion, but a decent amount of them, there's a belief that the man is in charge and the woman does what the man says. Again, that especially with modern day, the way things are changing, because religion is quite outdated when you think about how the world works today, that's going to be a problem, because a more modern day woman, for instance, or even modern day man isn't really going to be feeling that, because it's an old idea. The world has moved on. So again, you'd have to find someone who feels the same way as you, right? It can also be from an ethical point of view. Obviously, I talk about veganism and things like that. Again, it depends on what kind of vegan you're dealing with. It depends on, again, I guess some Muslim cultures can, beliefs can believe that there's certain animals that you eat, certain animals that you don't. Same thing with like Hindu and other Indian sort of cultures. There's a huge amount of their demographic that can be vegetarian. Again, it depends on how far this person feels this way. That can cause problems in relationships too, because, if, especially in terms of a person who's strongly against this from an ethical point of view, which of course is what a vegan is, but even in terms of Muslim and the other religious cultures, again, this could cause some friction, right? It could. So, it's all about navigating these things. And there's so much more. If one person is, I guess, maybe they didn't have a very good relationship with their opposite sex parent. Or, opposite, like gender, I don't know if I want to say gender, but like, the masculine, feminine polarity, like, even if you're not straight, if you're interested in the same sex. Again, the opposite duality that from what you are. Like if you're feminine, you're probably going to be looking for a masculine. Again, it's not always the case, but yeah, when it comes to attraction, we tend to choose one or the other, and then we choose the opposite. So again, in relation to that, the parent who played the masculine role and the other parent who played the feminine, this is going to be a big part in what guided you into what you're going to be attracted to. And this is very much the case, whether it's straight or gay couples. What your opposite sex parent is going to create a pretty decent influence into what you end up choosing, even if you do choose the same sex. Yeah, all these things play a role because it's a big part of what we grow up with. And that brings me to values. Do you and your partner share similar values when it comes to the relationship and how you build that? Or the idea of whether you have children or not and how you raise those children. Again, it gets more and more complex as you go down. But that's why I like talking about these things when it comes to compatibility. And yeah, obviously that's kind of a good way to broach it. But I just thought I'd bring up some of those things to chew over and think about, because I think it makes a big impact in what we choose in terms of relationships and who we decide to date or who we decide not to.